Welcome to More Than a Conversation, the podcast where we meet and have discussions with some of the most interesting people and innovative leaders in their fields from all walks of life. We will be discussing everything from politics to theology to religion to philosophy to life. Every once in a while, I may just be on here talking about whatever's in the news and whatever I think will be of interest to you. This is your host, Patrick Connolly, and I hope that today will be more than a conversation for you. Welcome to More Than a Conversation. This is your host, Patrick Connolly, and today I am joined again by a guest from one of our favorite resources here from Reasons to Believe. We have Dr. Fazale Rana is joining us again. Of course, we and those in the apologetic community know him affectionately just as Fuzz. But Dr. Rana, it is so good to have you back on More Than a Conversation today.
Patrick, it's great to hang out with you again. I loved our last conversation, so high expectations on my end for this conversation.
Well, I'm absolutely looking forward to this. And of course, a lot has changed over the months since the last time we spoke. I think it's been a little over a year. In fact, among those things is a change in role for you. Now, for those of you that are joining us, Dr. Rana is the now CEO and senior scholar of Reasons to Believe, which is an organization that is dedicated to communicating the powerful scientific case for Christianity. His books include Humans 2.0, The Cell's Design, and Fit for a Purpose. He's also been involved in writing other books and collaborating, presenting all sorts of things on the apologetics front, and you will be blessed with his work. But yeah, Dr. Rana, you actually, last time you were on, you were not the CEO, but you've stepped into that role, so congratulations on more work.
Yeah. Feel like I bought the Brooklyn Bridge or something like that. No, it's an honor to serve in any capacity at Reasons to Believe. I've been with them for 23 years as an organization, and I was mentored and continue to be mentored by Hugh Ross, who is the founder and was the president for nearly 36 years at Reasons to Believe, and he's excited to be in the founder's role where he's able to focus all of his energy on writing and speaking and doing those things that he really loves. And so I'm excited to lead the organization because it's what Hugh and his wife Kathy created is really something special as an organization in terms of really pioneering, I think, scientific apologetics, showing people that scientific discoveries provide evidence for God's existence and the reliability of Scripture. So it's an honor to serve in any capacity at Reasons to Believe, and so thanks for the kind words.
Now, does that mean that you will be still traveling, presenting, and will Dr. Ross still be doing that as well, or what's that look like now?
Yes, yep. I'm still expected to write and to speak and do interviews on science faith issues. That's what I really love. That's what I really feel called to do. But and Hugh is going to be doing the same thing. I think Hugh's more busy now since he's stepped away from the president's role than less busy. But he's busy doing the things that he really, really loves. And leading an organization is a mixed bag. It's fun to be able to shape the direction of an organization and to have a dream and a vision that you're able to put into play with God's help. But at the same time, it's very demanding as well. But I love what I do, and I'm grateful that God has given me this opportunity to work in ministry in an area where I have enormous amount of passion for.
Absolutely. And a lot of great work has happened from all of you there in the Reasons to Believe family. And we are always, again, are excited to have you on. Now, if you missed the previous episode with Dr. Rana, you can check out episode 35 of More Than a Conversation, wherever you downloaded this one. And we had a great conversation then about Neuralink and transhumanism and Elon Musk, who has been in the news more now than ever before.
Yeah.
Although now I think it's been less scientific reasons and more sociological reasons and political reasons that we've seen him in the news. That being said, wow. Of course, when we talk about transhumanism, we almost have to explain that we're not talking about the transgender movement, although worldview certainly affects both of those areas. But since the last time we talked about transhumanism and Neuralink, we've actually seen some other advances out there. We've seen some advances in AI, and I might have a question or two for you about that. But in that world of transhumanism, have we seen developments over that last year since we talked to you?
We have. I would say that the developments are more incremental than kind of revolutionary, but people continue to improve upon the techniques for gene editing, which is a way in which you can modify the genome with high precision, relatively easy using the CRISPR technology. And that allows for treating genetic disorders, of course, but it also, at the same time, can be used to create designer humans and even augment or enhance human beings beyond our natural limits. One of the most competitive and exciting areas in bioengineering are brain-computer interfaces. Almost every week I see one more advance in that technology where you can now the techniques have been developed so that people can actually control motorized wheelchairs with their thoughts using brain-computer interface technology. They are able to use the technology to allow patients to convert their thoughts into texts at a rate that's equivalent to what you and I would do if we're texting a message on a smartphone.
Wow.
And so the advances are incremental, but they are significant and they're exciting. Brain-computer interface technology is going to revolutionize medicine. But, when you think about how Elon Musk envisions that technology as the next generation of really user interfaces between the human user and electronic devices, that's where things start to become a little concerning, where people may have these permanent brain-computer interface implants where they are able to interface seamlessly with machines. And that, again, opens up the possibility of creating kind of human-machine cyborgs. And with that comes all kinds of, legitimate ethical concerns. And again, that type of advance fuels this transhumanist vision, which is the idea that technology can ultimately save us, that we can modify our bodies to such a degree that we can have a practical immortality. So it's a real idea that's out there that is going to significantly shape the future in the next couple of decades.
And as we talk about the advances that are being made, I do think that it's important for us also to recognize that these advances have to be weighed out in a serious manner by the church. That's why, these ethicists are engaging these things. These are real things. And there are advances that we never thought we would see. And yet here they are. Things we thought would never arrive. For example, AI has made a huge leap. Have you checked out any of the information regarding AI? And maybe it'll help you with writing a book if you've seen the chat bots that have come out.
Yeah. Well, I have, and I played around with a chat bot. In fact, I used it to send an email to some of our staff people. And, just for fun, I told them that I was doing it. But it was a remarkably accurate email in terms of what I wanted to convey. So I actually played around, and I'm working on an article about leprosy, and I asked it to write a paragraph introducing the leprosy, and it did a really remarkable job with that. So a little frightening.
Yeah, indeed. Definitely a world out there. I think for for me as a minister, as a pastor, among my colleagues, I think seeing this leap with the chatbots, that's really kind of caught some attention. We also saw the story of Google having a bot that one of the developers believed had become sentient. I'm sure that's a story that stood out to you. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. And, I am of the opinion that that AI technology is never going to be truly sentient. No, but it's going to become so sophisticated and so great at mimicking the human response appropriately to different circumstances that we're going to get the sense that it's sentient, even though it isn't. And so that would be my position on that, because I think ultimately our sentience as human beings is different than the sentience of animals. Though I would say some animals do seem to have sentience, I think ours is distinct in that it is ultimately shaped by our immaterial nature, our soul, or what you might call the image of God. So I think it's never going to truly be human in that sense. But, one of the things that makes us unique as human beings is something that scientists call theory of mind. That is that I recognize, Patrick, that you have a mind like me, and that I can then anticipate what you're thinking, what you're feeling. It allows us to interact with each other at a very sophisticated sociological level. And so human beings seem to be unique in this capacity, and then our ability to, again, link our minds together in these different social structures. But one of the consequences of having theory of mind is that we anthropomorphize. So we talk about our cars like they are, fine women, or some kind of beauty, or we think about machines around us as having a personality, or we think about our dogs and our cats as being like us as human beings, even though they really are not. So we project human qualities on things that aren't human, and we treat them in that way. It's what makes us exceptional as human beings and stand apart from other creatures. But when it comes to something like AI, I think the danger here is that if we have an AI system that is so capable of mimicking human emotion, appropriate human response to things, has the problem-solving ability, because of our tendency to anthropomorphize, we are going to view those AI systems as being like us, even though they fundamentally are not. So that's the real danger, is that we may actually be contributing to viewing AI as being exceptional, as being sentient, because of our nature as human beings and what makes us exceptional. That's in a sense the irony there.
And so would it also be possible that even if AI arrives at what we would call sentience, so it's so close that we make it sentient in our minds, I think the danger also is that we would have at best and I am no psychologist, but either a sociopathic, psychopathic, whatever it is, you would have something that's very good at mimicking, but without empathy, without those other traits that you described. And so I do think that the danger is really, really there. And of course, when you start reading about those things, you do see why the alarms are out there ringing, both from a Christian worldview perspective, like you adjust in Humans 2.0, but also in a real, I don't know, you've probably read the work, I believe it's Bostrom, I think, Superintelligence, but that work leads to some pretty dark conclusions. Of course, we have a different view of the end, but do you think it's possible that we do see some of those paths at least begin to be walked down with an AI that is sinister?
Yeah, well, I mean, that really becomes frightening, because if you do have an AI that is able to write its own code, that is able to undergo learning, it could very well become sinister. Or I know that people are trying to program morality into AI systems, but now it's like, who determines that morality, and how is that machine learning system going to take that initial input and alter it or modify it in light of other experiences. So it really is quite frightening. And in fact, this is one of the ultimate motivations, as we mentioned last time, from Elon Musk to found Neuralink, is that he feels as if AI is going to far surpass us as human beings and represents a real existential threat to humanity. And so his argument is that unless we build these brain-computer interfaces that allow us to interface our brains with computer hardware and computer software, we're not going to be able to keep up with AI, and as a result, could very easily become subjected to a type of servitude by these very machines that we create, or worse, be driven to complete annihilation or extinction as a species. So Elon Musk is kind of in the Nick Bostrom camp, where he has a very pessimistic, deeply concerning view of what the future could be with AI technology when we begin to lose the capacity to control it, which could happen quicker than anybody thinks.
You know, talking about AI and how dark that could get, obviously that's a conversation that we could have and we have had somewhat in the past. Again, I would encourage anyone to go back and check out episode 35 where we discuss that in more detail, and also to go check out Humans 2.0 by Dr. Rana, and you would be blessed by reading that book and take your time and go through it. A lot of great information there. You know, that brings us kind of to what we wanted to talk about today. The idea of our worldviews, understanding what makes us human, understanding that AI will never be human, understanding that there is something different between humans and animals, although we may have those soulish animals, if you will. There may be animals that exhibit certain things, and I know Hugh wrote about that extensively. I believe it was with the Nefesh, I believe, the soulish animals. But we recognize they're not human. Nonetheless, a lot of the world that we're living in views humans as nothing more than animals, which is what leads to this transhumanism movement that perhaps, you know, transhumanism, cyborgs, whatever it may be, that again sounds far-fetched, might just be the next step in evolution for humanity, if you will. But recently, and of course this is human trafficking, the month where we mark and remember and take notice of human trafficking awareness month in the month of January. And I believe the day was just a few days ago on the 11th. But you just went on a trip. And that trip, I believe, was a missions trip. And there was a lot of thought that came to you out of that. And that led to us having this conversation today. So tell me a little bit about that. You went to Cambodia, is that correct?
That's right. You know, my wife and I, you know, one of the areas that we're passionate about are issues that, you know, historically have been called social justice issues. That term has a different connotation today, but it's, you know, just concern about homelessness, about people that are marginalized in our world. And part of that are human beings that are trafficked. And, you know, I don't have the latest and greatest statistics, but literally tens of millions of people around the world at any one point in time are being trafficked, which is, you know, mind-boggling. It's modern day slavery. And many of those people are trafficked for, you know, for forced labor purposes, but about 30 to 40% are trafficked for sexual purposes. And of that percentage, about 50% of those that are trafficked for sexual purposes are children. You know, I can't think of a more horrific evil in the world. And it turns out that 3 countries in Southeast Asia are ground zero for child sex trafficking: India, Thailand, and Cambodia. And we traveled as part of a small team that was there to support the work of an organization called Agape International Missions, or AIM, that is located in a community called Sway Pak, which is just outside of Phnom Penh. And the reason they located their organization there, they're on the ground trying to battle child sex trafficking, is because Sway Pak is actually an international destination for child sex tourism, where people from the West will literally travel to that particular community for a vacation, if you will, where the idea is that they're going to exploit young girls and young boys sexually. And if you visit the community of Sway Pak, it literally is a small village outside of Phnom Penh where the roads in the community are dirt roads. And yet, if you go to Wikipedia and you look up Sway Pak, it'll tell you the first thing that this is one of the premier destinations for child sex trafficking. And so, when we travel to that community to, again, work in a support role with AIM, the question that kept coming to all of our minds was why? Why would a community tolerate foreigners coming into their community to exploit children in that way? And the best answer that I could come up with is it's probably a combination of the after effects of the Khmer Rouge. There are still people in Cambodia that are suffering because of those after effects, the corruption, the poverty, cultural views of women and children, and particularly female children, having little value. And then ultimately, I think there's a religious element to it, because in Cambodia, the primary religious system is Buddhism. And in Buddhism, the view is that, if you're suffering, it's because you have the wrong expectation. And if you just get over yourself and you align your expectation to reality, you're not going to suffer. You're not going to feel disenfranchised and dissatisfied. It's just your wrong expectations. And so, when you look at somebody that's being exploited, your message to them is just get over yourself, accept the reality of your circumstance. But the particular form of Buddhism that's being practiced in Cambodia is one that embraces reincarnation. This is where things become really problematic, in my view, because the view is that if you're suffering as a young female girl being sexually exploited, it's because you've deserved that you did something in your previous life that led you to being reborn as a young, poor, impoverished female that's going to be exploited. And if I step in and stop that, I'm interrupting your ability to pay off your karmic debt. And so I'm not going to intervene in that situation. So this is my best explanation for how an evil like that could be tolerated and even taken advantage of for economic purposes, economic gain. It's child sex trafficking is $1 billion, industry in certain parts of the world. There's a lot of money that people make because of that horrific practice. But that just illustrates how powerful ideas can actually be, and particularly, how we view human beings, and so, I oftentimes hear people say, well, why do you argue about evolution all the time? Why not just say God used evolution as a way to create? Well, it's because when you start working out the consequences of evolution, one of those consequences is that human beings are material entities, that we're just animals, glorified apes, nothing more, nothing less. And if human life has very little value, it really, leads to practices like this somehow being justified, or you're on a trajectory where you can justify this kind of exploitation if it serves an advantage to another person.
So you go there on this missions trip. You are seeing these people that are suffering, and yet to the people who are walking out the predominant faith view of that region, you are then an interloper. You are then a person who is coming in to interrupt divine, providential, correct action that should be happening in their life. I can't think of very many things that would be worse than what you're describing. To think that we would have children suffering in such a manner and then be told that this is just what the universe needs for things to be right. And I think that goes back to something else. You just touched on it. Ideas have consequences. ideas matter. They matter so much. In fact, a few years ago, I heard you, I believe you were speaking at Southern Evangelical Seminary's Apologetics Conference, and that was the theme of the year, was ideas have consequence, or have consequences. And I think sometimes if we're not careful in the church world, we can duck away from dealing with ideas or dealing with the why of what leads to a bad worldview around us. And sometimes we don't do enough to actually describe what the biblical worldview ought to be or why things like this matter. And again, as you talk about evolution now, there again, I'm not going to I guess, de-Christianize someone over having a different view of some aspects of Christianity. But I cannot go beyond the view of God created everything, and God created each set of beings, each species, each everything in the way that he saw fit in his timing. And for us to think that evolution, even theistic evolution, was that process, it just doesn't fit, because it does reduce us down. And I want to make sure I'm clear in this. What you're telling us is that even theistic evolution takes away from us as humans, correct?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's one thing to say, hey, maybe God used evolution as a way to create. That's clearly a distinct possibility. But if you're going to take that statement, then you have to look at the nature of how people conceive the evolutionary process. And it's considered to be this unguided, undirected process that is historically contingent, based on a sequence of chance events. And the metaphor that I often hear is that if you could rewind the tape of life and let evolution unfurl again, the outcome would be very different. And so everything in nature is a happenstance. Everything is imperfect because it's just cobbling together new designs from pre-existing designs. That evolution is constrained by history. There's no direction to it. There's no ultimate endpoint. And so that kind of mechanism means that not only are human beings really no different in our origin and our nature from other creatures, fundamentally, it's that we were just simply a lucky, happy accident of an evolutionary process. There's no fundamental meaning or purpose. Now, it's hard for me to square that mechanism with the idea that this is a means by which God creates deliberately, intentionally. That's part of my struggle. And so it's one thing to say God used evolution to create, but when you start thinking about, well, what is the nature of that mechanism? It just doesn't seem like it's the type of thing that God would do. And this is very different than saying God ordained a particular process in nature, the water cycle, for example, to make sure that the land is habitable, that plants can grow, that animals can thrive, that humans can thrive. Yes, God is utilizing a process providentially to accomplish his purposes, but that the nature of that process isn't antithetical to God's nature or to God's intentionality, if that makes any sense.
Sure. So obviously God is going to create, he's going to act according to his holy will. He's going to act in ways that fit according to his nature. And that would seem to eliminate the idea of God working through our concept of evolution. Now, that being said, the world is still walking with that worldview for the most part of evolution, and many in the church have allowed themselves to be taught that, and have bought into the idea that we all have evolved without thinking about that end. They still want to hold on to, we're humans, we're special, we're different. But at the end of the day, everything about humanity changes when we are no longer created by God uniquely. When we're not, then we're no different than any other animal. And we don't, put one lion in a cage because it killed another lion on the savannah, or even things like infanticide amongst a lion moving into another pride of lions, killing the young. We don't do that. But in humanity, or in humans, we would hopefully put someone in prison over an action like that. And so we see the difference, whether or not we want to admit it.
Hey, More Than a Conversation listeners, I hope that you are enjoying this conversation as much as I am, and I hope that you're getting something great out of it today. I'm just wanting to jump in here in the middle to take a moment and let you know a few ways that you can help out More Than a Conversation. First, wherever you're listening, please go ahead and click that subscribe button. That will definitely help, and that'll make sure that you get all the content. Also, if you have a way to rate, if your app allows you to give a 4-star, 5-star, whatever the rating is that's the top rating, I would so appreciate if you would go ahead and drop a rating there. That's how the aggregators and the distributors rank podcasts, and the higher the ranking you give, the more ears will be able to hear these great conversations. Thanks again, and I'm hoping that today has been more than a conversation for you. Now let's get back to it.
Go ahead.
But yet, I'm sorry, Patrick, but yet we also live in a culture where abortion is widespread, where we are creating embryos in a lab, to study them, to generate embryonic stem cells that we hope can be used for tissue replacement and organ replacement therapies. So, on one hand, we don't react negatively against infanticide when it happens, among animals, but yet with humans, on one hand, we do react with some level of repugnance when we think about infanticide, but yet on the other hand, because of the view that human beings are ultimately materialistic in nature, it allows people to justify abortion by, coming up with these arbitrary concepts that a fetus isn't really a human, or it is a human, but it's not really a person. So, the evolutionary worldview, if I could say that, allows for that kind of evil to be justified if it's convenient for society on a large scale.
If it's convenient, that's a good point. When pragmatism guides our principles, we certainly have a problem. Now, we hear the term "follow the science" a lot. We've heard it a lot over the last few years. On that issue of abortion, though, which you just raised, we don't hear so much "follow the science." So, and maybe you can settle this as you raise the issue. I am talking with a renowned scientist, a biochemist, I believe is your background. Is that correct?
It is, yes.
So as much as you can narrow it down, what is the correct scientific answer for when we call a human life human life?
I think it's at the point of conception, because at the point of conception, you have an entity now, a single cell, but you have an entity that is genetically unique compared to all other human beings that have ever lived. And it within that genetic material is the program to go from a single cell to a fully developed human being. But just because that human being is not fully developed doesn't make it any less human, because it's on this trajectory towards becoming fully developed. But we don't want to define what a human is or what a person is based on capabilities, but rather we define it based on the fact that this is, biologically speaking, a human, and it will become, again, a fully developed human being, biologically speaking, if that trajectory is left uninterrupted or undisrupted. And so, I cannot think of a human being at the point of conception or at any point during the course of development, anything other than a human person, as a biochemist, as a life scientist. That, to argue otherwise, to me, is just unjustified. And one of the things that's interesting when you look at the abortion debate is that it used to be people would argue that the fetus is not a human. If you were a pro-choice person, hey, the fetus isn't a human. But thanks to all the technology we have now, where we can visualize the fetus even at the very earliest stages of embryonic development, it's very clear how human it looks, right? How much like a human being it looks even within the first few weeks of growth and development. And so no longer do you see pro-choice people saying the fetus isn't a human. Now what they say is the fetus isn't a person. And so they use this concept of personhood to where they would argue that personhood only happens some point after birth, where maybe when that individual becomes sentient or self-aware. But this idea of personhood is an arbitrary concept that can, and the definition and the application again can vary in pragmatic terms. And so if you are a couple and you want that child, that child is in the womb is a person. And if you don't want that child, it's a human, but it's not a person. So it's totally arbitrary in terms of its application.
Yeah, it's interesting how many linguistic gymnastics that we play, how many scientific hoops we try to jump through to avoid saying that is a person in the womb. Now, I will probably never talk to anyone who is more of an expert on the cell than you are, who studied it in depth. And so what you're telling me is that single cell is different than every other single cell that's ever existed, its own unique DNA, and has all that is necessary. Obviously, it needs to be fed in time and that sort of thing, but it has all that is necessary as far as the building instructions of a human being right there.
Yes,
in that
exactly.
moment.
Exactly. Yes. And to me, that's why I would again see that as being truly a human being in every sense of the word. And when you look at the process of embryonic development, it is such a highly orchestrated, elegant process where there's so much evidence for forethought. Where it's just remarkable to me that the analogy is like a marching band going onto a football field, spelling out, let's say, Ohio, or UGA, since they won the national championship. We'll give them kudos there. But you have each person in that marching band has a different set of instructions where and yet they go out into the field and they know exactly where to go in order to spell out UGA in this case. But somebody ahead of time had to choreograph that, had to determine how everybody needs to move relative to one another in order to produce something that is coherent, right? That's something that has structure, that has meaning. And that's exactly what you see during the course of embryonic development. Cells are replicating, they're migrating relative to one another. At certain points, they start to undergo a process of specialization. Some of the cells actually die off. This is cell suicide that helps to sculpt the different biological features and it's just this highly orchestrated process where there's this complex interplay that's taking place. And these instructions had to come from somewhere. And so to me, they had to come from a mind. But it's even that process of embryonic development, and fetal growth and development that to me speaks of the fact that this is not just simply a mass of tissue. There's something very special here, because no other cell in our body is able to do that type of thing. Other than the egg cell, right?
We actually had a judge in South Carolina that just in a decision last week wrote that referred to a human person as an amorphous clump of cells. But I did think that it was, which obviously we understand wouldn't be correct. There's so much unique about that human being at that point. I did appreciate, though, in the same opinion, the justice made the mistake of, he was trying to let us know that he wasn't an expert and we needed more information, because how could he possibly know about pregnancy? This is on the Supreme Court of South Carolina. And then he said something that typically we haven't heard from the left lately. He said, men don't get pregnant. And so I appreciated that in the midst of defending abortion, he admitted that men don't get pregnant. So I'm not sure he meant to do that. But It was good. That being said, you went and your heart was moved because of the suffering that you saw. You felt something stirring, empathy, sympathy, no doubt anger at the people who perpetuate this evil against these children. And even as you describe it, I can't imagine how we live in a world where governments who regulate everything else can't find a way to stop travel for these purposes. And it's absolutely despicable. But the reason that you and I feel that is because we know that human beings are different. And we know, as much as we would get upset if people were traveling for the purpose of torturing animals for pleasure, there's something different about humans. And then obviously we're talking about human children. This is evil, just evil incarnate is what it would seem. A person who would be willing to help perpetuate this, both the individuals carrying this out, the people allowing it to happen, the people profiting on it. Can't imagine much more wicked than that. But the reason, again, we feel that is because we know that humans are different. Yeah. So both as a scientist and as somewhat of a philosopher, I think it's impossible to apply science to your worldview without some philosophy. How are humans unique as God's creation?
Well, of course, this is the concept of the image of God, that human beings uniquely bear this quality called God's image. And in the image of God is this idea that I think permeates all of Scripture. It's explicitly discussed in only a few places, but the concept undergirds all of Scripture, because as image bearers, you might say that each human being is sacred or has a sacred nature to them, that each human being has infinite worth and value. And so when you look at the 10 Commandments, or you look at the prophets, or you look at Jesus, describing the greatest commandment, all of this has as the backdrop this idea that human beings have infinite worth and value because human beings bear God's image. It's remarkable to me that the prophet Amos, for example, would condemn, I don't know if I think it's Judah, condemns Judah, if I'm not mistaken, because for committing acts of idolatry, but also for exploiting human beings that are marginalized, where he equates the exploitation of human beings to idolatry. Well, it makes sense if you think about the fact that if human beings bear God's image, and how you treat another human being is equivalent to how you treat God, that suddenly it makes sense why, a violation against, God himself is the same as a violation against another human being. And so that's a very powerful concept that when you begin to apply that to a real life situations, and you really apprehend that, number one, it changes the way you think about yourself as a human being, right? I think a lot of people that question the meaning and the purpose of life, that are suicidal, many times I think it's because they don't have an appropriate view of who they are relative to God. But it also changes the way you think about other people and what you're willing to tolerate. And what you're, and it motivates, I think, many people to action. And I very much saw that being the ultimate motivation for, this organization, Agape International Missions. I mean, they on purpose placed themselves right in the middle of one of the darkest places in the world as, the light of Christ, and worked with some local authorities to shut down a large hotel in that town that was used as a brothel, and they were able to purchase the hotel, and they converted this den of iniquity into a church and a Christian outreach center. And suddenly now there's this bright light in the community, and one by one they started shutting down brothels, converting them into employment centers, restoration centers, medical centers, and the list goes on and on, rescuing these girls. Sadly, those girls that are rescued could not be returned to their families because their families would in turn sell them back into slavery. This is how horrific the evil is in that community. So they would take, guardianship over these young women. And part of that messaging to them was, you are valuable, you are made in God's image. And so I got a chance to meet some of these young girls who were at one point in their lives trafficked and who now, have a real hope for the future, who have really apprehended the message of the gospel. And there's so much joy that they had. I couldn't believe that these girls had lived a life that was horrific beyond what I could even imagine. And this is the power of the gospel. This is the transformative power of the gospel. I was never more convinced that Christianity was true when I saw how transformative the impact of the ministry of AIM was in that small community, where a bright light was shining, and part of that messaging was human beings matter, human life matters, and there is a God who loves you and gave himself up so that you could be reconciled to him. The power of the gospel is amazing, and it's transformative beyond imagination.
And how does the gospel fit with someone who holds the view of evolution? Is there, how can you make the gospel and evolution come together? Is there a way?
Well, one of the things I find mind-blowing is the about face that's beginning to take place among evolutionary anthropologists. For the entire history of anthropology as a scientific discipline, it's been shaped by Darwin's ideas that human beings have evolved. But part of that is that human beings only differ in degree, not kind from other creatures, that we're really just glorified apes. And in recent years, I'm seeing a growing number of evolutionary anthropologists who are saying, whether we like it or not, the evidence really strongly points to the idea that human beings are exceptional, that we really are different in kind, not different in degree. And that in and of itself, this concept of human exceptionalism, which is a scientific idea, aligns with the biblical view that human beings are exceptional because we bear God's image. But also what's interesting is these scientists are now trying to figure out, well, what makes us stand apart? And they've concluded that it's ultimately our capacity for language and music and art that arises from symbolism and ability to manipulate symbols, our theory of mind. And if you start thinking about at least certain concepts or models of what constitutes the image of God, these become, in a sense, scientific descriptors for the Imago Dei. When you start talking about the idea that human beings uniquely possess the capacity for language, and you realize that anthropologists cannot explain in evolutionary terms how language could have evolved. This is a big problem in evolutionary anthropology, is how do you explain the origin of language? You now suddenly have a framework that allows for this biblical idea of the image of God to gain scientific credibility in the minds of people that hold to an evolutionary worldview. And if human beings really are exceptional in a way that aligns with Scripture, that sets you up for, I think, for the gospel itself. It suddenly creates a pathway in which the gospel carries potency.
And without that exceptionalism, it would seem that there can be no redemption or gospel, because what are we being redeemed to? We're just animals.
Right.
So it just doesn't work. So evolution obviously has affected us so much. Specifically, how do you think that this taking God out of the equation fuels things like human trafficking from the Western perspective? So I see, people say, hey, they have to have a karmic debt that they've got to pay for. They've been reincarnated in this terrible position, so they must have been bad in their previous life, which obviously we would dismiss. But from the Western perspective, how does removing God from the equation promote things like human trafficking and the child sex trade and these other atrocious acts?
Yeah, and I think to engage in something like human trafficking, where it's just a very clear exploitation of another human being, you have to somehow take the view that that human life simply doesn't matter. And the easiest way to do that is to say that that human being is just simply nothing more than, again, the product of a blind, unguided process. That messaging is in the backdrop, I think, of our culture at large, and it allows for that kind of exploitation. What I think is interesting, though, is that even though our culture is becoming increasingly post-Christian and increasingly secular, increasingly scientific, there still is this echo of the Christian worldview that influences people. And so people, even though some people, again, can justify these horrific acts of evil because of the view they have of human beings, there still are people in our culture who may not be Christians who somehow intuitively know that it's wrong to exploit another human being. And I think it's because within us, we recognize that there's something special about human beings and that human beings should be afforded some kind of dignity. So I think there still is this echo of the Christian worldview in our culture at large that at least allows people who are non-Christians to be concerned about things like sex trafficking or other types of injustices they see in the world. But I think for someone to engage in that kind of evil, actively engage in that kind of evil, or to allow yourself to be subjected to that kind of evil can only happen if you think of yourselves as a human being as being of having no worth or no value ultimately.
In what other ways can you point out the idea of human evolution affecting our culture, like here in the United States?
Again, we talked a little bit about abortion. We talked about, scientific practices like embryonic stem cell research that I think are ultimately direct outworkings of an evolutionary worldview. But even, things like racism, right? Or, it is possible if you somehow view another human being as not as less than being, someone who has full dignity and full value because of being made in God's image. And so, or you can begin to think about things like genocide or, we're going to be looking at a high-tech form of genocide, I think, in the near future as CRISPR gene editing and other gene therapies start to come into play, where maybe the exploitation isn't going to be against people from different ethnic backgrounds, but it might be for people who bear genetic defects, where if you bear a genetic defect and you're not willing to undergo genetic modification to correct that defect, that you're going to be viewed as being someone that should be discriminated against, someone that should be exploited. So there's all kinds of, I think when you look at most evils in our world today, even the rampant, use of pornography, in our world, where pornography is becoming increasingly normalized. To me, the thing that's deeply troubling about pornography isn't the man, who's, caught up in the addiction of pornography. It's the women that are being exploited to produce the pornography in the first place. You have objectified a woman. If you think of that woman as being made in God's image, as being sacred, how could you ever, engage in that kind of activity? It's again, there's a horrific evil there.
So we see it in the way that we deal with other human beings. We see that in the way that we deal with the unborn. We see it in our diminished morality and sexual ethic. It would seem that the idea that humans evolved is antithetical to God, to creation, but it also results in things that are simply antithetical to a Christian worldview, even when we try to cover it with a cloak of Christianity. It would seem that just the logical conclusion leads to something that does not fit the nature of God or the nature of the way Christians view life. That being said, there are yet groups out there that promote theistic evolution, that promote evolution in a way that is different than the model of creation that, obviously we have old earth creationists, we have young earth creationists, but then there are those that promote the idea that almost a deistic evolution, I would say. How dangerous is it, for example, seminaries and universities that are Christian in nature, but that are promoting the idea of evolution or bringing in speakers to promote the idea of evolution to their students? How dangerous is that idea to building a Christian worldview?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, you made a comment earlier that I thought was really, really a great comment, is that there are a number of brothers and sisters in Christ who have embraced this idea that God could use evolution as a way to create. So I don't want to disfellowship with them for that reason. I don't want to de-Christianize them for that reason. And I think, because evolution is a mainstream idea in science, it's very easy to say, look, we don't have to fight about evolution anymore if we just simply accept it as being a reality, we'll be taken more seriously. This is part of the argument by the scientific community. If we're more willing, to embrace evolution, it's really critical for our witness as Christians. That's oftentimes the argument that I hear, and yet we have to be willing, I think, to go against the mainstream, when the consequences of those ideas are deeply concerning, because it's not just simply, consequences with regard to how we think about other human beings, but there's some biblical and theological issues relating to issues of inerrancy. How do we understand the image of God? How do you understand the idea of the fall, original sin? The list goes on in terms of the theological implications and biblical implications that arise from that idea too. So, I think it's important that, probably institutions of higher learning expose their students to this idea and why do people hold to that idea. But I think it's one thing to expose people to that idea. It's another thing entirely to promote it. I think, what you're promoting is an idea that on the surface seems plausible, seems to maybe solve some problems in terms of how we engage our culture at large, how we engage the scientific community. But at the end of the day, the cost, I think, of gaining those things is too great, because the biblical and theological costs are huge, but I think so too are the sociological and psychological costs of how we think about human beings.
And so it would seem that I'm hearing you today say that if we really want to change things like human trafficking, if we really want to change things like abortion, but even just violence against one another, racism, all of those things, we have got to go back to instilling the idea that human beings are created in the image of God.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. It's not going to be a popular position to espouse, and I've gotten a lot of blowback from people when I've taken that stance, but I think ultimately that's true, and the good news is that even though the idea of creationism isn't in the scientific mainstream, there's very powerful scientific evidence from cosmology, from geology, from biology, that really does promote this idea that there is a creator. There's evidence for design that we see. There are scientific challenges that can be raised against a strict materialistic evolutionary view. And so even though we're not in the scientific mainstream by questioning evolution or by not embracing evolution, it's not that we are no longer being scientific. we still are being scientific. We still have evidence that we're using to support our position. And that evidence is becoming stronger as far as I'm concerned, not weaker.
And so I think it would be important for Christians to be encouraged. For some time, I think Christians were trying to find a way to, keep their faith, but also follow along with what would be mainstream science. And so I think that's why groups such as Reasons to Believe are so important, and work like what you have done, what Hugh Ross has done, what Ken Samples has done. It's important because it helps us understand that to be a Christian doesn't mean you have to throw science out the window. It doesn't mean that every scientific discovery needs to be dismissed. But what it does mean is that if you are a believer, we still have to take, and you brought up inerrancy, we have to take the word for being the word. And that's one of the things that's beautiful about the Reasons to Believe model, is that the Bible is dealt with as saying what it says and meaning what it means, as well as understanding that science actually fits or the biblical model. And so I think it's important, and be encouraged if you're listening to this, watching this later, and, especially if, you're in college, you're in high school, you're a parent of someone in those age ranges, and they're being exposed to more and more ideas. There is solid scientific evidence out there that supports the idea that human beings were created in the image of God. And we do not have to back off of that point. We do not have to flee from Genesis chapter 1, nor all of the text in Job, nor Isaiah and everywhere else that you find creation text. We do not have to run from science as believers. We can scientifically say that the evidence is there. And so one of the places that people can go to get that information is to Reasons to Believe. So if someone has questions about these things, what kind of resources would you suggest to them, Fuzz?
Yeah, well, the easiest thing for people to do is just to go to our website, reasons.org. There's all kinds of articles and videos and podcasts that people can access for no cost. There's also books and other things that we have available as resources. But that would be, the first place that I would go. And, all of us at Reasons to Believe are on social media, Facebook and Twitter, and are posting things and trying the best we can to interact with people that ask questions or make comments, about the things that we post. Social media, checking us out on social media or going to our website would be the easiest things for people to do. That's a great way to get started.
So get over there. Is that reasons.org? I believe it is.
Yes. Reasons.org.
Actually, that is one of my daily disciplines, is to go. And if you go to the Explore area, there's always 3 articles there. So I try to make sure I've read the latest thing on Reasons. So I try to keep caught up on a daily basis. But there's great information there. There's wonderful insights to follow, following Fuzz, following Hugh Ross, following Ken Samples on social media. They will give you all sorts of great information. Of course, like I said last time that you were on, I like to share your stuff every once in a while, and then it lets your friends think that you are much more learned and intelligent than you are, because you shared something from someone with the credentials of a Fuzz Rana or a Hugh Ross, and they think you're an astrophysicist or a biochemist, which I am not, but I know a couple. So that's the beautiful thing about the kingdom of God. Fuzz, thank you so much for joining me today, and thank you for helping enlighten us as to the power of an idea. And if there's anything that I think I'm walking away from this conversation with today, is how important biblical worldview is. And most people would never connect. I have never connected that idea, not explicitly. You know what? The problem with this human trafficking center in Cambodia connects all the way back to how we view creation. And if we would fix our view of creation, we would fix a lot of other problems. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Patrick. It's been great hanging out with you.
Absolutely. I look forward to the next time that you're on. And for everyone else, I hope that today has been more than a conversation for you.
Thanks again for being part of More Than a Conversation today. If you'd like more content like this, check out my blog at www.pastorconley.com. That's PASTORCONLEY.com. Again, that's pastorconley.com. I'd also love to see you join us in worship at Garden Sanctuary. If you're ever in Rock Hill, South Carolina, or the greater Charlotte area, we'd love to have you stop by and worship with us. Check us out at www.gardensanctuary.org. That's gardensanctuary.org. Until next time, I hope this has been more than a conversation.